My name is Ethan, and I have never been able to forget what I saw in that forest. I was camping alone beside a quiet, glassy lake, the kind that perfectly reflects the sky above. The forest surrounded me in every direction, dense and undisturbed. It was supposed to be a peaceful getaway, a chance to escape the stress of everyday life. But then I saw my reflection move on its own. At first, I thought it was just a trick of the water. The surface rippled slightly, distorting my face, but when the water stilled, something felt wrong. My reflection stood there, staring back at me, its expression just slightly off. A smirk that I hadn't made, eyes that weren't quite my own. I blinked. The reflection didn't. A shiver ran down my spine. I splashed the water, disrupting the image, and backed away from the lake. The fire crackled behind me, a comforting sound in the unsettling silence of the woods. Maybe I was just tired, but as I lay in my tent that night, I couldn't shake the feeling that something was watching me. Then I heard the footsteps, soft, deliberate, crunching against the damp forest floor. I held my breath, my fingers gripping the zipper of my tent. I listened, counting the steps. They stopped just outside. I wasn't alone. Slowly, I reached for my flashlight, hand trembling. Taking a deep breath, I unzipped the tent just enough to peek outside. Nothing. The fire had burned down to embers, casting long shadows across the trees. The lake was still and dark, reflecting the moon's pale light. I exhaled shakily and zipped the tent back up. Maybe it was an animal. Maybe the forest was playing tricks on me. Then I heard a whisper, not from outside, from inside the tent. My body went rigid. The voice was low, almost playful. "Why did you leave?" Every nerve in my body screamed at me to move, to run, but I was frozen. My mind raced ahead. Someone slipped into my tent while I was distracted. Was I losing it? Summoning every ounce of courage, I flicked on the flashlight and turned empty. I was alone. I scrambled out of the tent, gasping for air, my flashlight swinging wildly through the trees. Nothing. I turned toward the lake, my heart hammering against my ribs, and there it was, my reflection. Standing at the water's edge, not mimicking me, watching me. Then, slowly, it stepped forward, not toward me, out of the water. I ran. I didn't stop. I didn't look back. My body moved on pure instinct, crashing through the undergrowth, branches slashing at my arms. I didn't stop until I reached my car, breathless and shaking. The next morning, I convinced myself it had been a nightmare. The exhaustion, the darkness, it had all played tricks on my mind. But as I drove past the lake, I made the mistake of glancing at my rearview mirror. My reflection was still there, and it was smiling. My name is David, and I am still trying to convince myself that what happened in that forest was real. I had always loved hiking alone, escaping into the wilderness where the world felt quieter. That's why I chose the deep trails of Black Hollow Forest. The path was well marked, the air crisp with the scent of pine, and for the first few hours, it was everything I had hoped for. Then, I started noticing the loop. It began with small things. A fallen tree that I was sure I had passed before. A strangely shaped rock that looked eerily familiar. At first I told myself it was just paranoia, that the forest was playing tricks on me. But as the hours stretched on, I realized the truth. I was walking in circles. I checked my GPS, but the screen refused to load. My phone, which had been at 50% battery, was now dead. Panic threatened to take hold, but I forced myself to breathe. I had been hiking for years. I could find my way back, or so I thought. I changed direction, deliberately stepping off the trail, hoping to find a landmark that would lead me out. But no matter which way I went, I always ended up back at the same spot. The loop was unbreakable. Night fell quicker than I expected. The trees cast long, stretching shadows, and an eerie silence settled over the forest. My flashlight flickered as I set up a small fire, trying to calm my nerves. Then I heard the footsteps, soft, deliberate, circling just beyond the glow of my fire. I held my breath, gripping the small knife in my pack. "Hello?" I called, my voice swallowed by the darkness. No answer, only the slow, shuffling steps, as if something was testing the edge of the light, waiting. I didn't sleep. Every time my eyes grew heavy, the sound would return. A dry rustling, a whisper of movement just beyond my sight. By dawn, my mind was in tatters. I had to move. I packed my things and forced my aching legs to keep going. But the nightmare continued. Each turn, each desperate sprint forward, brought me back to the same cursed clearing. The forest refused to let me go. Then, as I stood there, gasping in exhaustion, I noticed something new. Footprints, not mine, and not just one set, dozens of them. Overlapping, crisscrossing in every direction, as if countless others had walked this very same loop before me. And some of them lead deeper into the woods. I followed them, my heart hammering in my chest. The trees grew denser, the air heavier, and then, in the distance, I saw it. A figure tall, motionless, standing at the edge of the path. It had no face, only a void, where features should have been, and yet, I knew it was watching me. Then it raised its hand and pointed. To my horror, I followed its direction back to where I had come from, back to the cursed path. The moment I turned back, the figure was gone. I ran. I don't know how long I ran, but suddenly, I stumbled out onto a road. A passing car stopped, the driver's concerned face swimming in my vision. I turned to point at the forest behind me, but the path was gone, vanished. Now, whenever I pass by that part of the forest, I feel it. A pull, a whisper at the edge of my mind. The loop is still there, and it's waiting for someone else to take the wrong step. My name is Daniel, and I wish I had never agreed to that camping trip. It was supposed to be a simple weekend getaway, me, Jake, and Olivia, just 3 friends, escaping the stress of city life. The forest was vast, its towering trees forming a natural cathedral above us. The first night was peaceful, with only the occasional crackling of the firewood, and the distant calls of nocturnal creatures filling the air. Then came the whispers at first. I thought I was imagining them. A faint murmuring just beyond the tree line, barely audible over the wind. But as the night deepened, the voices grew clearer. They weren't the rustling of leaves or the distant chatter of other campers. No, these whispers carried words. My name. I shot up from my sleeping bag, heart pounding. Olivia stirred beside me. "Did you hear that?" She mumbled sleepily. I hesitated. "Yeah, I think someone's out there." Jake, who had been keeping watch by the dying embers of the fire, turned to us. "You guys are overreacting. It's probably just the wind." But I wasn't convinced. I strained my ears, trying to catch the sounds again. For a moment, silence. Then, like a breath against my ear, the whisper returned. "Daniel, ... I recoiled, scrambling out of my tent. The trees swayed gently, their shadows shifting under the pale moonlight. My breath came in shallow gasps as I scanned the forest. Nothing, and yet, the presence felt undeniable. Jake sighed, shaking his head. "Dude, get some sleep. You're spooking yourself." I tried. I really did. But the whispers continued, and they weren't just calling my name anymore. They were telling me things, secrets, deep, buried secrets that I had never spoken aloud. Regrets from my childhood, moments of shame I had tried to forget. They slithered into my mind like creeping vines, wrapping around my thoughts until I could no longer ignore them. By the second night, I was losing it. Olivia noticed first. "Daniel, you look awful. You barely slept?" I nodded absently, gripping my knees. I wanted to tell them, but how could I? How do you explain that the forest itself is whispering your darkest thoughts back at you? Then Jake spoke up, his voice unusually quiet. Actually, I think I heard them too. A chill ran through me. Olivia turned pale. This isn't funny, Jake. I'm not joking, he said, rubbing his temples. Last night, I kept hearing someone calling my name, and they knew things. Stuff even you guys don't know about me. The three of us sat in tense silence. The realization settled in. This wasn't just paranoia. We weren't imagining it. Something was listening to us that night. We tried to stay awake together. We kept the fire burning high, surrounding ourselves with its flickering light. But the whispers didn't care. They came anyway. Soft, sinuous voices that slithered between the trees, weaving through the night air. Each whisper cutting into our minds like a blade. Jake, ... Olivia, ... Daniel, ... I gripped Olivia's hand, feeling her tremble. We're leaving at first light, I whispered. Jake nodded, his face pale and sweat-slicked. Agreed. Dawn couldn't come fast enough. The moment the first light of the sun touched the trees, we packed up, moving quickly, barely speaking. But as we left the campsite behind, I felt a prickle on the back of my neck. A final whisper drifted to my ears, almost affectionate. See you again soon, Daniel. I didn't look back, and I never will. My name is Eric, and I swear something was hunting me in that forest. It started as a solo hiking trip, a chance to disconnect from the noise of daily life. The woods were dense, the trails winding and unpredictable, but I had my map, my gear, and a good sense of direction. Or so I thought. By the second day, I noticed something odd. The forest felt too quiet. No birds, no rustling leaves, just silence, except for the sound of my own footsteps. At first, I brushed it off. Maybe I was just overthinking it. Then I saw the footprints. They weren't mine. I stopped dead in my tracks, my heart hammering. The prints were fresh, leading in the same direction I had been walking. But there was no one else on the trail. I would have heard them. I would have seen them. Swallowing my unease, I kept moving. Maybe someone had passed through earlier. Maybe. The damp earth made the tracks look newer than they were. But as I continued, the feeling of being watched grew stronger. That night, I set up camp in a small clearing. The fire crackled softly as I ate my dinner, trying to shake off my paranoia. But the woods were watching. I could feel it. Every rustling leaf made me jump. Every creaking branch sent my pulse racing. Then, just beyond the fire's glow, I heard it. A twig snapping. I turned sharply, flashlight in hand, but there was nothing. Just the dense wall of trees surrounding my camp. The hairs on the back of my neck stood on end. I wasn't alone. I barely slept. Every time I closed my eyes, I swore I heard breathing soft, measured, too close. When dawn broke, I packed up in record time and started hiking back toward the main trail. That's when I saw the new footprints, right next to mine. They hadn't been there before, and worse, they weren't just beside mine. They overlapped them, step for step, as if something had been walking right behind me the whole time. I ran. Branches whipped against my face. Roots threatened to trip me, but I didn't stop. My lungs burned, my legs screamed, but I kept going. The feeling of being chased was unbearable. I swore I could hear something heavy, unnatural footsteps pounding the earth behind me. But every time I dared to glance back, there was nothing. I reached my car just as the sun was setting, practically throwing myself inside and locking the doors. My hands shook as I fumbled with the keys. The engine roared to life, and I tore out of there without looking back. But as I reached the highway, my phone buzzed with a new notification. A photo. It was a picture of me, taken from behind, deep in the woods. And in the corner of the frame, almost too dark to see, was a shadowy figure, standing just a few feet away. I never hiked alone again. My name is Mark, and I should have never sought shelter in that cabin. I was deep in the woods, miles away from civilization, when the storm rolled in. The rain came down in sheets, drenching me within seconds. My map was soaked, my phone had no signal, and the trails had turned into muddy rivers. Desperation pushed me forward until I stumbled upon an old wooden cabin nestled between the trees. It looked abandoned, but at that moment, anything was better than freezing in the storm. I pushed open the creaking door and stepped inside. The air was thick with dust and the scent of damp wood. The place was empty, no furniture, no signs of recent life. Only a battered fireplace and a warped wooden floor greeted me. Relieved, I dropped my backpack and tried to get warm by the fireplace. That's when I noticed the stains at first. They looked like old watermarks on the floorboards. But as I took a closer look, the dark red hue became unmistakable. Dried blood. And it wasn't just a single stain. It trailed across the room, leading to a small, broken trapdoor in the corner. A rational person would have left, but the storm was relentless, and curiosity gnawed at me. I reached down and pulled at the trapdoor. It groaned in protest, before snapping open, revealing a steep, dark descent. Then, I heard a faint shuffling sound from below. My breath caught in my throat. I shone my flashlight into the opening, illuminating a narrow stone staircase disappearing into the darkness. The sound came again, like something shifting just out of sight. I should have left. I should have bolted out of that cabin and braved the storm. But something about that darkness pulled at me. A terrible, morbid fascination. I stepped down. The air grew colder with each step. The stench of decay filled my nose. My flashlight flickered as if protesting my decision. The staircase opened into a small, windowless room with stone walls covered in deep scratch marks. Chains dangled from the ceiling, rusted but still strong. And then I saw the bed. A rotting, blood-soaked mattress sat in the center of the room. Something had struggled here. Something had died here. A whisper of movement came from the shadows. I spun around, my flashlight shaking. A figure stood at the far end of the room, barely more than a silhouette. It was tall, impossibly thin, its limbs elongated in a way that made my stomach twist. Its head tilted slightly, as if it were studying me. Then it moved. Not a step, not a shuffle, but a sudden, impossible shift, like reality itself had glitched. One moment, it was at the far wall, the next, inches from my face. I ran, scrambling up the stairs. I didn't dare look back. The sound of something chasing me echoed in my ears, long, jagged breaths, nails scraping against stone. As I burst into the cabin, the storm's howling wind drowned out everything else. I slammed the trapdoor shut and threw myself outside, sprinting into the rain. I didn't stop running until I reached my car. Days later, I returned with the police. The storm had passed, but the cabin was gone. No trace of it remained. Just an empty patch of earth where it had once stood. But I know what I saw, and I know that it's still out there, waiting for someone else to step inside. My name is Lucas, and I don't trust mirrors anymore. When I was 10, my parents bought me an old mirror for my bedroom. It was tall and framed with dark wood, its surface slightly warped with age. They thought it would make my room look more grown up. I hated it immediately. It wasn't the way it looked, it was the way it made me feel, like something was watching me. At first I ignored it, but then I started noticing little things. My reflection seemed slower than it should be. When I turned my head, my mirrored self lingered just a fraction of a second too long before following. I told myself I was imagining it. Then, one night, I caught it smiling. I wasn't smiling. My blood ran cold. I stepped closer, staring at my reflection. The moment I blinked, it went back to normal. But I knew what I had seen. I didn't tell my parents. I was afraid they wouldn't believe me. Instead, I started avoiding the mirror, changing in the bathroom, looking away whenever I passed by. But it got worse. One evening as I was getting ready for bed, I dropped my toothbrush. When I bent down to pick it up, I caught a glimpse of the mirror out of the corner of my eye. My reflection hadn't moved. I shot upright, heart pounding. My reflection stood there, staring at me, completely still. My real body trembled, but the thing in the mirror, did and single quotes too. Then, slowly, it raised its hand and waved. I ran. I slammed my door shut, panting in terror. That night, I draped a blanket over the mirror. I didn't sleep. The next morning, the blanket was on the floor. That was the last straw. I begged my parents to get rid of it. My dad, irritated but amused, finally agreed. He carried it to the basement and leaned it against the wall. I felt relief wash over me. But that night, as I passed the basement door on my way to bed, I froze. The door was slightly open, and from the darkness below, I heard a whisper, "Lucas, I'm not in the mirror anymore. I never ran faster in my life." My name is Noah, and I was never afraid of the dark until the whispers started. I was 8 years old when I first heard them. Faint, hushed voices drifting from beneath my bed late at night. At first, I thought it was my imagination, the way kids sometimes think shadows are monsters. But the more I listened, the clearer the voices became. They were whispering my name. "Noah, come closer." I sat up in bed, my heart hammering. The whispers weren't loud, but they weren't random either. They were calling to me, beckoning me. I told myself it was just the wind, or maybe the house settling. But then, one night, I made a mistake. I answered back, "Who's there?" I whispered. Silence. Then, after a long pause, a breathy giggle. "We are." A chill ran down my spine. My throat went dry. I wanted to run, to call for my parents, but my body wouldn't move. The air in my room felt heavy, pressing against my chest. I forced myself to look down. The darkness beneath my bed was impossibly deep, stretching farther than it should have. The shadows weren't just shadows, they were moving. Then, a hand reached out. Pale, thin fingers curled over the edge of my bed frame, followed by another, and another. Too many hands. Clutching, grasping, pulling something up from the abyss beneath me. I screamed. My parents burst into my room, switching on the light. The moment the brightness filled the room, the hands vanished. The whispers stopped. My mom held me, rocking me back and forth, telling me it was just a nightmare. But I knew it. WASN single quotes too. From that night on, I refused to let my feet touch the floor after dark. I would leap into bed from as far away as I could, terrified that something would grab me if I got too close. My parents humored me for a while, but they didn't understand. Then, one night, my little sister crawled under my bed, looking for a lost toy. She screamed. By the time my parents ran in, she was sobbing, trembling, in terror. "The voices," she shrieked. "They told me to stay. They told me I belong with them." My parents moved me to another room that night. They never spoke about it again. We moved out of that house the next summer, but sometimes, in the dead of night, I still hear the whispers, and I know they're waiting for me to listen again. My name is Ben, and I don't remember drawing them. When I was 9, I loved to sketch. I would fill entire notebooks with doodles of superheroes, animals, and silly monsters. My parents encouraged it, even buying me a big sketchpad to keep by my bed in case I wanted to draw at night. Then, one morning, I woke up to find something strange, a drawing I had no memory of making. It was different from my usual doodles. The lines were rough, frantic, like they had been drawn in a hurry. The picture showed my bedroom, but something was off. In the corner, by my closet, was a shadowy figure, tall, featureless, its hands stretched toward my bed. I stared at it, confused. I didn't remember drawing this. Maybe I had been sleep drawing. My mom laughed when I showed her, saying I had a wild imagination. The next morning, there was another drawing. This time, the figure was closer. The next night, I forced myself to stay awake. I clutched my pencil, my sketchpad on my lap, determined to catch myself in the act. But at some point, exhaustion took over, and I drifted off. When I woke up, my sketchpad was on the floor, and there was a new drawing. The figure was now standing beside my bed. Panic shot through me. My hands were clean, no smudges of graphite, no aching fingers. I hadn't drawn this. I was sure of it. I shoved the sketchpad into my closet, determined to forget about it. But that night, I woke up to the sound of scratching, not on my walls, not on my door, on the paper. With shaking hands, I reached for the sketchpad and flipped it open. A fresh drawing stared back at me. This time, the figure was bent over me, inches from my face. I screamed. My parents ran in, flipping on the lights. I showed them the sketchpad, flipping through the pages in a frenzy. But the last drawing was gone. The paper was blank. They calmed me down, told me it was a nightmare, but I knew better. I threw the sketchpad away the next morning. I refused to draw after that. But last week, while visiting my childhood home, I found an old box of my things in the attic. Buried beneath dusty toys and forgotten books was my sketchpad, and inside, the last drawing had returned. The shadowy figure was still there, but this time, it was smiling. My name is Oliver, and I know my toy isn't just a toy. When I was 6 years old, my parents bought me a stuffed rabbit named Benny. It was soft, with long ears and a stitched-on smile. I carried it everywhere, even talked to it like a best friend. I was just a kid, of course. I thought it could hear me then. One night, it answered back. I was tucked in bed, the glow of my nightlight barely reaching the corners of my room. Benny sat beside me, its glassy eyes reflecting the dim light. I whispered my usual goodnight to him and turned over, pulling the blankets up to my chin. A moment later, I heard it. A tiny voice, whispering goodnight, Oliver. I froze. My breath hitched in my throat. Slowly, I turned my head back, toward Benny. The stuffed rabbit sat there, unmoving, smiling as always. My mind raced. Had I imagined it? Maybe I was just sleepy. I convinced myself it was nothing, and went to sleep. The next night, it happened again. This time, I was sure I hadn't imagined it. Oliver, wanna play? The whisper came from right beside me. My entire body locked up. I wanted to scream, to throw the rabbit across the room, but I couldn't move. My small fingers clutched the blanket as I forced myself to speak. How did you talk? Silence then, a giggle, soft and slow. I've always been able to talk, silly. You just never listened. I jumped out of bed, running to my parents' room in terror. My mom groggily walked me back, muttering that I was just having bad dreams. She tucked me in, patted Benny's head, and turned off the lights. The moment the door shut, the whisper came again. You shouldn't have told. I threw Benny across the room, heart pounding. The toy landed in the corner, lifeless. Or so I thought. Minutes passed, but I stayed wide awake, watching, waiting. Then movement. A slow, jerky twitch of the rabbit's arm. Its head tilted just slightly toward me. As if acknowledging my fear, I buried my face into my pillow, squeezing my eyes shut, praying for morning. When I woke up, Benny was back in bed, beside me. I begged my parents to get rid of it. They laughed, told me I was just dreaming, but I knew the truth. That night, I locked Benny in my closet. I barely slept, listening to the silence, every creak of the house making my skin crawl. Just as I felt my body relaxing, just as my eyelids started to droop, a scratching sound from inside the closet, slow, rhythmic, followed by a whisper through the door. "Oliver, you can't lock me away forever." I never screamed so loud in my life. The next day, Benny was gone. My mom said she didn't know what happened to it. Maybe it got lost. Maybe she donated it. I don't care. I just hope it never finds me again. But sometimes, late at night, I swear I hear a whisper from my closet, laughing. My name is Liam, and I know what I saw in my closet. When I was 7, I had an old wooden closet in my room. It was massive, towering over my bed, its doors creaking even when no one touched them. At night, when the lights were off, it always seemed darker than the rest of the room, like it absorbed the shadows. And then, one night, I saw the eyes. I had been dozing off when a soft creak pulled me from my half-sleep. My heart skipped. The closet door was open just a crack. I sat up, rubbing my eyes, telling myself it had just been the wind. But as I reached to turn on my bedside lamp, I froze. 2 glowing eyes stared at me from the darkness inside the closet. I couldn't breathe. The eyes weren't human. They were too large, too reflective, almost like a cat's but with no pupils. Just a dim, ghostly glow. They blinked, once, twice, watching me. I threw the blankets over my head, squeezing my eyes shut, whispering to myself that I was dreaming. But the creaking continued. Slow, deliberate. The closet door was opening wider. I wanted to scream, to call for my parents, but my voice refused to work. My body was paralyzed with fear. Then, the whisper came. "Liam, ... I see you." It wasn't a child's voice. It was deep, rasping, like something trying to mimic speech, but getting it wrong. The blankets felt suffocating, trapping me in darkness, but I was too scared to move. Seconds felt like hours. Then the whisper came again, closer. "Come play with me." I shot out of bed, bolting toward the hallway. My feet barely touched the ground as I flung myself into my parents' room. I woke them up in a frantic panic, babbling about the eyes in my closet. My dad groaned and walked me back to my room, grumbling about nightmares. But when we got there, the closet door was closed, and there was nothing inside but my clothes and a pile of toys. I didn't sleep the rest of the night. My parents assured me it was just my imagination, but I knew better. I stopped sleeping with the lights off. Every night, I would shove my dresser against the closet door, just in case, and for a while, nothing happened, until a few weeks later, when I heard the creak again. The dresser had been pushed aside. The closet door was open, and this time, the eyes weren't inside the closet. They were staring at me from the foot of my bed. My name is Jason, and I know I got into the wrong tent that night. It was late. Long after the fire had died down, and I had just woken up needing to use the bathroom. The woods around our campsite were eerily quiet, and the only light came from the dim embers of the fire and the pale glow of the moon above. I unzipped my tent, stepped out into the cold air, and made my way toward the trees. When I came back, I crawled into my tent as quietly as possible, careful not to wake up my friend, Mark, who had been snoring just minutes before. But the moment I settled in, something felt wrong. The air was colder inside. The fabric of the sleeping bag wasn't mine. And then breathing, not Mark's, not slow, rhythmic snores, but shallow, ragged breathing. I froze. My eyes adjusted to the dark, and I could make out a figure lying beside me, facing away, motionless. A wave of confusion and fear washed over me. I wasn't in my tent. The figure twitched. I bolted upright, heart hammering. "Mark," I whispered. But as I reached out, the figure sat up. I didn't see its face. I didn't need to, because the thing beside me moved wrong, its spine too stiff, its movements unnatural. And then, it turned. I scrambled backward, shoving myself toward the tent flap. My fingers fumbled with the zipper, shaking violently. Behind me, I heard a voice that sounded like mine, but wasn't. "You're in the wrong tent." I ripped open the flap and tumbled out, gasping. My real tent was a few feet away, untouched, the zipper still closed. Without hesitation, I stumbled toward it, throwing myself inside and yanking the zipper shut behind me. Mark stirred awake. "Dude, what the hell?" I couldn't speak. I couldn't explain. My body trembled as I listened, but there was nothing. No footsteps. No movement from the other tent. The next morning, I worked up the nerve to check. There was no other tent. My name is Ethan, and I should have never swum in that lake. It was supposed to be a perfect summer camping trip. Just me and my friends, spending a weekend by the water, enjoying the fresh air. The lake was beautiful, stretching endlessly, its surface calm and inviting. We set up our tents near the shore, planning to spend the days swimming and fishing. But then, something happened. Something none of us can explain. It started on the first afternoon. As I floated on my back, staring at the sky, I felt something brush against my leg. I jolted upright, scanning the water, but there was nothing. Probably just seaweed, I told myself. But the feeling of something slithering past my skin sent a chill up my spine. Then Matt screamed. We turned to see him flailing in the water, eyes wide with terror. "Something grabbed me," he gasped, kicking toward shore. We rushed to help him out, but when he stood on the sand, his leg was bleeding. 3 long thin scratches trailed down his calf. "Did you hit a rock?" Sarah asked, voice shaky. Matt shook his head. "No, it pulled me." None of us knew what to say. There was nothing in the lake big enough to scratch like that. We tried to shake it off, but the uneasy feeling lingered. That night, as we sat around the fire, the lake was eerily still. No ripples, no gentle waves lapping the shore. Just a smooth, glassy surface reflecting the moonlight. Then we saw the shape. A figure stood in the water, not on the shore, and the water waist deep, completely still. It was too far to make out details, but we could see its outline against the moonlit lake. "Who the hell is that?" Ryan whispered. No one answered. None of us moved. Then, in the blink of an eye, it disappeared beneath the surface. A heavy silence fell over us. My skin prickled. The lake had been calm. There were no ripples, no sound of splashing. Just gone. We didn't sleep much that night. The next morning, the lake looked normal again, as if nothing had ever been there. But Matt refused to go back in the water, and honestly, I didn't blame him. By noon, we decided to pack up early. As I loaded my bag into the car, I glanced back at the lake one last time, and I saw it again. A pale face just beneath the surface, staring up at me with hollow, black eyes. I blinked, and it was gone. We left without another word, and I've never gone near a lake again. My name is Emily, and I will never follow strange tracks in the woods again. We were deep in the forest, miles away from civilization, when we found them footprints in the damp earth. At first, they seemed normal, a single trail leading deeper into the trees, barefoot, slightly sunken into the mud. Except something was wrong. The footprints only went one way. There were no returning tracks. No sign that whoever left them had ever turned around or come back. Just an endless path stretching into the shadows of the forest. "Maybe they belonged to another camper," Adam suggested. I didn't like it. The prints were fresh, too fresh. Whoever made them should have still been nearby, but the woods were silent. Too silent. "We should head back," I muttered, an uneasy feeling creeping into my stomach. "Come on, Em," Rachel teased, grinning. "What if it leads to something cool? Maybe an old cabin, or something we shouldn't find," I cut in. But the group had already made up their minds. Against my better judgment, I followed. We walked for what felt like an hour, the footprints guiding us deeper into the trees. The farther we went, the heavier the air became. The trees grew taller, their branches twisting unnaturally, blotting out the sky. Then Adam stopped. "Guys, look." We followed his gaze and felt our stomachs drop. The footprints had stopped, just like that, mid-step, as if whoever had been walking had simply vanished into thin air. No scuffle, no sign of struggles, just nothing. Rachel let out a nervous laugh. "Okay, that's freaky. Maybe they climbed a tree, or she," I hissed. Something was wrong. The forest felt different. The air was too still. No wind, no rustling leaves. Even the distant sounds of birds had disappeared. Then, behind us, another set of footprints appeared. Not ahead of us, behind us, leading back, the way we had come. "Guys," Adam's voice wavered. "We didn't leave those. Something was following us." A twig snapped. We ran. Branches slashed at my arms as we sprinted, our only focus on getting back to camp. The air was thick, pressing against us, slowing us down. The trees seemed closer now, as if the forest itself was shifting, trapping us inside. Then, out of nowhere, the ground disappeared beneath me. I hit the dirt hard, the breath knocked from my lungs. Pain shot through my ankle. I groaned, trying to push myself up, but then I saw them more footprints. But these weren't ahead of me or behind me. They were around me, encircling me. I screamed. The others reached me, dragging me to my feet, half carrying me as we bolted back toward camp. We didn't stop, didn't look back. Not until we finally burst through the tree line. The moment we crossed into the clearing, the air changed. The weight lifted. The sounds of the forest returned as if nothing had ever happened. But the footprints didn't stop at the tree line. They stopped right at the edge of our camp, watching, waiting. My name is Daniel, and I will never forget the night the forest went completely silent. Camping was supposed to be peaceful, a weekend away with my friends, escaping the noise of the city, sitting around a fire and telling stories. And for the first night, that's exactly what it was. But on the second night, something changed. I first noticed it when I woke up in the middle of the night, my throat dry. I reached for my water bottle and paused. Something felt off. Then I realized what it was. The forest was silent, not just quiet silence. No rustling leaves, no chirping crickets, no distant hoots of owls. Even the wind had died. It was as if the entire world had been placed on mute. A creeping unease coiled around my chest. I sat up, glancing around the tent. The others were still, asleep. I considered waking them, but stopped myself. Maybe it was just a weird trick of nature. Maybe the wind would pick up again, the sounds would return, and everything would be normal. Then I heard it, breathing, right outside. My tent, slow, deep, too steady. My entire body tensed. I strained my ears, trying to convince myself it was just one of my friends who had woken up and stepped outside. But the longer I listened, the more I realized it wasn't human. It was too rhythmic, too deliberate, like something pretending to breathe. Then, ever so slightly, my tent zipper moved. I stopped breathing. The zipper only moved an inch before it stopped, as if whoever or whatever was outside was testing it. A slow, dragging sound scraped against the fabric of my tent. I snapped my eyes shut, forcing myself not to make a sound. My heart pounded so loudly, I was sure it could hear me. The dragging continued, moving along the side of the tent, circling it. Slow, unhurried. Then it stopped, right at the entrance. Minutes passed, I don't know how many. Then, suddenly, a sharp rustling sound echoed from the other side of the campsite. The thing outside my tent moved fast. A series of soft, rapid footsteps, disappearing into the woods. The moment it was gone, the sounds of the forest returned all at once. The Wind whistled through the trees. Crickets chirped. The distant hoot of an owl filled the air. Everything was normal again, but I knew better. Morning came, and I didn't mention what had happened. Not at first. But then, Sarah, pale and shaken, whispered, "Did anyone else hear?" Breathing last night. One by one, the others nodded. We packed up and left that morning, and as we drove away, I couldn't shake the feeling that something somewhere was still out there, listening. My name is Jake, and I still don't know who or what sat with us that night. It was supposed to be a fun weekend. 5 of us, me, Ryan, Claire, Matt, and Saruti, decided to go camping deep in the national park, far from the noise of the city. We set up our tents, built a fire, and spent the evening laughing, roasting marshmallows, and telling stupid ghost stories. Then, at some point, we weren't alone anymore. I don't remember when he arrived. One moment, it was just the 5 of us, and the next, there was someone else sitting by the fire. A man. He was wrapped in a tattered coat, his hood pulled low over his face, staring into the flames. None of us saw him walk into camp. None of us even acknowledged his presence at first, as if he had always been there. Then Ryan noticed. "Hey, who the hell is that?" We all turned. The conversation stopped. A thick silence settled over the group. The stranger didn't move, didn't look at us, just sat there, hands folded, breathing slow and steady. Sir," Claire tried, her voice uneasy. "Are you lost?" "Nothing." Matt grabbed a flashlight and pointed it at him. "Hey, we're talking to you." The moment the beam of light hit him, my stomach twisted. His skin was wrong, grayish, weathered, almost waxy, and his eyes. I don't even know if he had eyes. Just 2 deep, dark pits where they should have been. He smiled. Not a normal smile. His lips stretched too wide, revealing teeth that were too sharp, too perfect. "It's a lovely night for a fire," he murmured. Something in his voice made my skin crawl. Sarah grabbed my arm. "Jake, let's go." We all felt eaten, overwhelming, gut-wrenching wrongness. Without another word, we stood up, backing away from the fire, from him. He just sat there, watching, grinning. We ran to our tents, zipping them shut, our breaths ragged. No one spoke. No one dared move. I lay there, heart pounding, listening. The fire crackled. Then footsteps, slow, deliberate footsteps, circling our tents. I squeezed my eyes shut, my fingers digging into the fabric of my sleeping bag. The steps stopped outside my tent. I held my breath. A whisper. "Let me in." I don't remember falling asleep, but the next thing I knew, the sun was rising. Cautiously, we unzipped our tents and stepped outside. The fire had burned down 2 embers. The stranger was gone. No footprints. No sign that anyone had ever been there except us. We packed up and left immediately, not speaking of it until we were miles away. None of us could explain it. None of us wanted to. But sometimes, when I close my eyes at night, I swear I can still hear the fire crackling and a whisper asking to come in. My name Istrison and I picked up a hitchhiker who was never really there. It was past midnight, and I was driving home from my shift at the gas station. The roads were empty, just miles of dark highway stretching ahead. That's when I saw a man standing by the side of the road, thumb out, face half hidden by the glow of the street lamp. I don't usually pick up hitchhikers, but something about him felt familiar, like I had seen him before. Without thinking, I slowed down and rolled down my window. "Need a ride?" I asked. He nodded, silent, and climbed into the passenger seat. For the first few minutes, he didn't say much, just stared straight ahead, hands resting in his lap. The car felt colder with him inside, like the heater wasn't working right. Then, finally, he spoke. "Long drive ahead." I glanced at him. His voice was strange, flat, distant, like an echo of itself. "Not too long," I muttered. "You from around here?" He didn't answer. Something about him made my skin crawl. I couldn't put my finger on it, but my hands tightened on the wheel. The road stretched endlessly ahead, the darkness pressing in around us. My headlights barely seemed to cut through it. Then I noticed the rearview mirror. He wasn't in it. My stomach twisted. I flicked my eyes back to him. He was still there, sitting stiffly in the seat, but the mirror reflected only me. I swallowed hard. My pulse pounded in my ears. I forced my voice to stay calm. "So, where are you headed?" Silence. Then, slowly, he turned his head toward me. The movement was too slow, too unnatural. I never left. The car swerved as my grip slipped from the wheel. I gasped, trying to regain control, my breath coming in ragged gulps. When I looked back at the passenger seat, tight was empty. I slammed on the brakes, my heart hammering. The road was deserted. The seatbelt lay undisturbed, the door still closed. He had vanished. Shaking, I turned my gaze back to the mirror, and there he was, in the back seat, smiling. My name is Ryan, and I still don't know what happened to that car. It was a slow night at the gas station, the kind where time drags, and the silence makes you second-guess every little sound. The wind howled outside, rattling the windows, but there hadn't been a customer in over an hour. I was about to step outside for some fresh air when the bell above the door chimed. A man walked in, tall, lean, dressed in an old gray jacket. His face was blank, unreadable, but his eyes, there was something off about them. He placed a 20 on the counter and simply said, "Pump 4. I nodded, punched it into the register, and glanced outside. That's when I saw the car. It was an old sedan, faded blue, parked at Pump 4. Nothing strange about it except that I hadn't heard it pull in. The lot was empty just minutes before. No headlights, no engine hum, nothing. I tried to shake the unease creeping up my spine and handed the guy his change. He didn't take it. He just turned and walked back outside, disappearing into the night. I waited, watching, expecting him to start pumping gas, but he never did. Instead, he opened the car door, slid inside, and just sat there. Minutes passed. 5, 10, 15. The pump handle remained untouched. The engine never started. He never moved. I grabbed my flashlight and stepped outside, my breath misting in the cold air. The closer I got, the more I felt something was wrong. The inside of the car was pitch black, too dark. Even with my flashlight shining through the window, I couldn't see anything. No dashboard, no seats, no driver. Just an abyss. I tapped on the window. "Sir?" My voice wavered slightly. No response. I reached for the door handle, hesitating. Every nerve in my body screamed at me not to open it. But something about the unnatural stillness compelled me forward. I pulled the door open. The car was empty. No driver, no seats, no interior at all, just a hollow shell, an endless, yawning void. Inside, my flashlight beam didn't touch anything. It just disappeared into the black. Then, from behind me, a whisper, "You shouldn't have done that." I spun around, my heart hammering. The lot was empty. The car was gone. I stumbled back into the store, locking the doors, my hands shaking so badly. I nearly dropped my flashlight. The security footage from that night showed me standing outside, staring at nothing. There was never a car at Pump 4, but every few nights, I still check the lot, and sometimes, just for a second, I swear, I see taillights fading into the dark. My name is Jake, and I still don't understand what I saw that night. I was working the late shift at the gas station, same as always. It was quiet, just the hum of the refrigerators and the occasional car pulling in for gas. Around 3 a.m., black sedan rolled up to pump number 4. Nothing unusual about that, till I realized the man inside wasn't moving. He just sat there, hands on the wheel, eyes staring straight ahead, engine running, but completely still. At first, I figured he was just taking a moment, maybe checking his phone, maybe lost in thought. But after 5 minutes, then 10, then 15, he still hadn't moved. I stepped outside, shivering in the cold night air, and walked toward the car. "Hey sir, everything all right?" No response. I got closer. The headlights cast long, eerie shadows across the pavement. That's when I noticed something was off. His hands weren't just on the wheel, they were gripping it tightly. His knuckles were bone white. His posture was rigid, unnaturally stiff, as if he were frozen in place. And then I saw his face. His features were blurred. Not like he was out of focus. Not like my eyes were playing tricks on me. His face looked wrong, as if someone had smeared his entire identity like wet paint. His eyes, his mouth, his nose, they were there, but shifting, melting together in a way that made my stomach turn. I stumbled back, my breath coming in shallow gasps. The air around the car felt wrong, heavy, pressing against me like invisible hands. I turned and bolted back inside, locking the doors behind me. Through the glass, I watched. The man didn't move. Then, without warning, the car's headlights flickered off. The engine died, and in the reflection of the station window, I saw him, not in the car anymore, right behind me. I spun around, but there was nothing, just the empty store, the humming refrigerators, the flickering fluorescent lights. My heart pounded as I turned back toward the window. The black sedan was gone, no sound, no movement, just gone. I checked the security cameras the next morning, needing proof that I hadn't lost my mind. But the footage showed nothing, no car, no man, just me, standing outside, talking to empty air. My name is Lucas, and I made the mistake of opening the back door. I worked the overnight shift at a quiet gas station off a deserted stretch of highway. The kind of place where no one stops unless they have to. The kind of place that should have been empty at 3 a.m., except for the door. The gas station had an old back door, one that had been bolted shut for years. My manager always told me, "That door doesn't open. Hasn't in a long time. Leave it alone." And I did, until the night it knocked. I had been restocking shelves when I heard it, a soft, rhythmic knock-knock from the back room. At first, I thought it was just the pipes, maybe the wind rattling the old frame. But then it happened again. 3 knocks, precise, expectant. I froze. No one should be back there. The only way in or out was through the main entrance, and I hadn't seen a single car in over an hour. Swallowing, I grabbed my flashlight and stepped into the stockroom. The door loomed in the dim light, heavy, rusted, a thick chain looped through its handle, secured with a padlock that had been there since before I was hired. Another knock. This time, the sound came from inside. I stumbled back, my breath catching in my throat. That wasn't possible. There was nothing on the other side of that door but an old, empty storage shed. I should have walked away. I should have ignored it. But something compelled me forward, my fingers trembling as I reached out. Just a peek, just to prove to myself that nothing was there. I lifted the latch, the chain slipped free. The door swung open at first. There was nothing, just darkness, a vast, endless black that stretched deeper than the storage shed should have allowed. It was like looking into a tunnel with no end. My flashlight flickered, the beam swallowed by the void. Then, a whisper. Finally, cold air rushed past me, and something moved inside the darkness. A shape, shifting, stretching toward me. Long fingers, hollow eyes, a grin too wide for any human face. I slammed the door shut and threw the chain back into place, my hands shaking violently. The knocking started again immediately, harder this time, more urgent. I stumbled backward, grabbing my phone, but my screen was nothing but static. No service, no escape. I ran to the front of the store and waited, heart hammering. The knocks continued for what felt like hours. Then, just as suddenly as they had begun, they stopped. Morning came. My shift ended. My replacement arrived. I didn't say a word. I quit the next day, but sometimes, when I pass by that gas station late at night, I see the back door, and it's always slightly open. My name is Ethan, and I should have quit my job the first time I saw him. I worked the night shift at a small gas station off a lonely highway. It wasn't a bad job, boring most of the time, but peaceful. Most nights, I'd get a handful of truckers and late-night travelers, filling up their tanks and grabbing snacks. But then he started coming. It was always the same. At exactly 2:37 a.m., the bell above the door would chime. A tall man in an old, tattered coat would step inside. He never spoke. He never bought anything. He just stood there, staring at me from under the brim of his hat. His face was shadowed, his features impossible to make out. Every night, I'd ask, "Can I help you?" And every night, he wouldn't answer. Just stood there for a few minutes before turning and walking back out into the night. It was unsettling, sure, but I told myself he was just some drifter, maybe homeless, looking for shelter, until I checked the security footage. I don't know what made me do it. Maybe it was curiosity. Maybe deep down, I already knew something was wrong. But when I rewound the tape, my stomach twisted. The doorbell chimed. The camera caught the door, swinging open, but no one was there. The tape showed me standing behind the counter, visibly nervous, talking to nothing, looking straight at empty space, as if someone was standing there. I replayed it over and over, my fingers trembling. Each time, it was the same. The door opened. The bell rang. I reacted, but the store was empty. That night, when 2:37 a.m. rolled around, I held my breath. The bell rang. The air turned ice cold, and there he was. I forced myself to look up, but this time, he had moved closer. I felt my throat tighten. He wasn't by the door anymore. He was standing at the counter, right in front of me. I don't know how I didn't hear him move. He tilted his head slightly, as if studying me. Then, in a voice that sounded like dry leaves rustling, he whispered, "You can see me now." The lights flickered. I bolted. I didn't think. I just ran out the back door, into the freezing night, gasping for breath. My manager found me the next morning, huddled behind the dumpster, shaking. I quit that day. But sometimes, late at night, when I drive past that gas station, I swear I see someone standing at the window, waiting.